Daniel had always enjoyed the quiet rhythm of life in Willow Creek. The streets were lined with tall oak trees that swayed gently in the wind, and the houses had neat gardens full of colorful flowers. Daniel's own little home had a small white fence, a modest front yard, and a tiny porch where he often sat in the evenings, sipping tea and watching the sunset. He liked the calm, predictable nature of his neighborhood. Nothing unusual ever happened here, or at least, that was what he had always believed. On a Thursday afternoon, Daniel was sitting in his living room reading a book when a loud, sharp knock on the front door made him jump. It was not the usual soft tap of a neighbor dropping by or the mailman delivering letters. This knock was forceful, almost demanding. He set his book aside and walked slowly to the door, curiosity mixed with a strange feeling of unease. When Daniel opened the door, he saw two men standing there. Both were dressed in dark uniforms, their shirts tucked neatly into black trousers, and they wore shiny badges on their chests. Daniel's first thought was that they must be law enforcement officers, but something about their appearance felt off. Their badges looked too polished, almost as if they had been bought online. Their shoes were unusually shiny, and the way they stood, rigid, almost mechanical, made Daniel uneasy. "Good afternoon," one of the men said in a firm voice. "We are here regarding complaints about your property." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Complaints? About what exactly?" he asked cautiously. The man glanced at his companion and then back at Daniel. "You know, violations of local rules, your fence, your garden decorations. The HOA has reported you." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. HOA, Homeowners Association. He had heard stories about people getting fined for minor things like leaving a garden gnome in the wrong spot or painting a door the wrong color. But this felt different. These men didn't sound like ordinary HOA inspectors. They were trying to scare him, and he could feel the tension rising. "I'm sorry," Daniel said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I haven't received any official notice about this. Can you show me some identification?" The men hesitated for a moment, then one of them pulled out a badge. Daniel took a careful look at it. The badge had a logo and a number, but something was clearly wrong. It looked printed, the edges uneven. The man spoke quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "We are authorized to handle this matter. It is in your best interest to comply immediately." Daniel's instincts told him not to let them intimidate him. He had always been careful, and he knew he had not broken any laws. Still, the feeling of unease grew. These men were not regular officers. He noticed the small details. The uniform shirts were slightly too bright, the pockets empty, the belts lacking proper equipment. Their voices carried a hint of arrogance, as if they expected fear to make him cooperate. "I understand your concern," Daniel said calmly, "but I need to verify your authority. Please wait here while I contact the sheriff." He stepped back slightly, giving himself space to retreat if necessary. One of the men leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You don't want to involve anyone else. Things can get complicated if you do." Daniel nodded politely, hiding his nervousness. He reached for his phone, keeping it in his pocket, and dialed the local sheriff's office. While the call was connecting, he pretended to listen carefully to the men, asking questions about the supposed complaint. "Which section of the regulations am I violating?" he asked. "Can you provide the official document?" The men exchanged glances, their confident expressions faltering slightly. It was clear they were not used to being questioned. "You don't need to worry about that," one of them said hastily. "It's all in your best interest to comply immediately." Daniel could feel his heart racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had always believed that staying composed in tense situations was the key to solving problems. The phone call connected, and he spoke quickly but clearly. "Hello, Sheriff Collins. This is Daniel Martin at 45 Willow Creek Lane. I have two men at my door claiming to be law enforcement, but I believe they are not real. Can you send someone?" The sheriff's voice on the other end was reassuring. "Stay where you are, Daniel. Do not let anyone in if you feel unsafe. Help is on the way." Daniel thanked him and hung up, glancing at the men who were now growing impatient. He took a deep breath and decided to buy more time. "Please step aside for a moment while I check something inside," he said politely, moving toward the door as if he needed to retrieve documents. The men hesitated, but curiosity or arrogance kept them standing. Daniel slipped back into the living room and checked that the door was locked behind him. His mind raced as he thought of all possible scenarios. Could they be connected to the HOA? Or was this a criminal scheme using the HOA as a cover? Either way, he knew he needed to stay cautious. He quickly gathered some important documents, including the official letters from the HOA that he had saved over the years. He made a mental note of every detail, the appearance of the men, their words, the time, and the sequence of events. If things escalated, he would need proof. Minutes passed, and Daniel kept the men engaged with polite conversation. "I understand the concern about neighborhood rules," he said. "I want to resolve everything properly. Can you please leave me your contact information?" The men looked uncomfortable. One muttered something about needing to leave soon, glancing nervously at the other. Daniel sensed that his calm approach was working. He continued to ask questions, each one more pointed than the last. "Do you have a reference number for this complaint? Which office sent you?" The silence was growing. The men realized they were being challenged, and their confidence was slipping. Daniel could feel the tension in the air, but he stayed firm. He did not raise his voice, did not panic, and most importantly, he did not let them sense fear. Suddenly, he heard the familiar sound of a car approaching slowly down the driveway. It was the sheriff's vehicle. Relief and hope surged through him. The men noticed the car too and quickly turned their heads, their faces betraying surprise and worry. Sheriff Collins stepped out of the car, uniformed and calm, his presence commanding attention. "Daniel, are you okay?" he asked, moving toward the front door. Daniel nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, Sheriff. They showed up claiming to be cops, but I believe they are not real." The sheriff looked at the men who now stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "Sir," he said firmly to the fake officers, "you need to leave immediately." For a moment, the men hesitated, glancing at each other. They had been caught off guard by the real authority figure. Slowly, reluctantly, they backed away and turned down the street. Sheriff Collins followed them with his eyes to ensure they left the neighborhood safely. Once the immediate danger was gone, Daniel invited the sheriff inside. He explained everything, from the initial knock to the strange behavior of the men and the vague threats about his property. The sheriff listened carefully, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the incident. "It seems these men were trying to intimidate you," Sheriff Collins said thoughtfully. "We will investigate this further and make sure the HOA is following the law. You did the right thing by staying calm and calling us." Daniel exhaled deeply, finally allowing himself to feel relief. He realized how close he had come to being coerced or threatened, and he understood the importance of being prepared and cautious. That day had started like any other, with the peaceful rhythm of Willow Creek. But it had turned into a moment that tested his courage and quick thinking. Even after the fake officers left, Daniel stayed alert. He locked all doors, checked the windows, and made sure nothing was left unsecured. He also made a mental plan of how he would handle future encounters, should they arise. The sheriff promised to follow up and check the neighborhood for any suspicious activity, giving Daniel a sense of security he had never felt so strongly before. As the evening settled, Daniel sat back on his porch with a cup of tea, looking out at the quiet street. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the houses and trees. He felt a mixture of relief and determination. This incident had shaken him, but it also reminded him of the importance of courage, preparation, and staying calm under pressure. Willow Creek could return to its peaceful rhythm, but Daniel knew he would always be vigilant now. He also realized that sometimes the most ordinary day could suddenly become extraordinary, and the way one responded could make all the difference. The strange knock had brought fear, uncertainty, and danger, but it had also shown Daniel his own strength and resilience. By the time night fell, the streetlights flickered on and the neighborhood grew quiet once more. Daniel went inside, locking the door behind him, grateful for the presence of real law enforcement and the knowledge that he had handled the situation wisely. The morning after the strange knock, Daniel woke with a restless feeling. The sunlight streamed through his window, but it did little to calm the unease lingering in his chest. He had spent the previous evening replaying the events in his mind, analyzing every word, every movement of the two men who had posed as police officers. Even though they had fled when Sheriff Collins arrived, their presence had left a deep mark on him. The thought that strangers could come to his home and try to intimidate him made him feel both cautious and determined. Daniel got ready for the day, making a cup of coffee and sitting at his small kitchen table. The phone call to the sheriff had brought some relief, but it also reminded him that he was not entirely safe. His neighborhood had always seemed peaceful, but that perception had changed in a single afternoon. He looked out the window at the street below, noticing the neat lawns and tidy houses. Yet he now saw them through a lens of caution. Anyone could be watching. Anyone could be lying. As Daniel sipped his coffee, there was another knock at the door. His heart jumped, but he did not panic. He had learned from yesterday that calmness was crucial. Slowly, he approached the door, peering through the peephole. Two men stood there again. They were the same ones from yesterday, dressed in the same dark uniforms with shiny badges. Their expressions were more impatient this time, almost threatening. Daniel's first instinct was to step back and call the sheriff again. But he also knew that confrontation, if handled wisely, could protect him. He unlocked the door just enough to speak through it, keeping his body behind the door for safety. "Good morning," he said calmly. "Can I help you?" The taller man stepped forward slightly. "We are here to remind you about your property violations," he said firmly. "The HOA has warned you, and now action must be taken. If you do not comply, there will be consequences." Daniel felt a chill. The word consequences made him think of threats. But he did not show fear. "I have already contacted the sheriff," he said, his voice steady. "I would prefer to handle this legally. Can you provide your official identification?" The men exchanged glances. Their confident demeanor faltered for a moment, as if Daniel's insistence on verification had caught them off guard. "You don't need to involve anyone else," one said, lowering his voice. "It will only make things worse for you." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I am only asking for verification. That is all. I am willing to resolve any legitimate concerns, but I will not accept threats or intimidation." The men's faces hardened. They had expected fear, not calm assertiveness. They repeated their warning about consequences, but this time, their voices lacked the same certainty. Daniel noticed subtle signs that betrayed them. A slight tremor in one man's hands, the other avoiding direct eye contact, and the unnatural stiffness in their stance. Realizing that time was of the essence, Daniel decided to play a careful game. He stepped back slightly and gestured toward the inside of his home. "Please wait outside for a moment while I gather documents that might clarify this issue," he said. In truth, he was preparing to call Sheriff Collins again and make sure backup arrived. The men hesitated but stayed at the door. Daniel moved quickly to the living room, keeping his phone in hand. He opened the call app, and while pretending to be busy with papers, he dialed the sheriff. "Sheriff Collins," he said quietly, "they are back. The same two men from yesterday are here, threatening me about HOA violations. Please send assistance immediately." The sheriff's calm voice reassured him. "Do not engage them physically. Keep your doors locked and remain inside. Officers are on their way to your location. Stay on the line if possible." Daniel nodded silently. He hung up and took a moment to observe the men. They were growing impatient, pacing slightly, muttering among themselves. Their earlier bravado was fading. Daniel realized that fear was their weapon, and his calm refusal to be intimidated was weakening their control. He decided to gather evidence. He grabbed his camera and began taking discreet photos of the men through the window. Their faces, badges, and uniforms were all captured. He also noted their behavior and mannerisms, knowing that documentation could be crucial if legal action was required. The taller man noticed Daniel's activity and shouted, "Stop that! You are making things worse for yourself." Daniel's voice remained steady. "I am documenting this for my safety. You have already threatened me. I am simply keeping a record." The men looked frustrated, realizing that their plan was not working as expected. Daniel had expected confrontation, but he had not anticipated such persistence from the fake officers. He continued to speak calmly, asking specific questions. "Which office are you from? Who sent you? Can you provide a reference number?" The questions seemed to unsettle them further. They fumbled over their words, unable to provide clear answers. It became obvious that they were not real law enforcement. Daniel could sense their fear of being caught now that a real sheriff was on the way. Minutes passed and the tension grew. Daniel could hear the distant sound of a car engine approaching. Relief surged through him. The sheriff was arriving, and the fake officers could no longer act with confidence. Sheriff Collins arrived swiftly, stepping out of his vehicle with a calm, authoritative presence. "Daniel, are you okay?" he asked, moving toward the door. "Yes, Sheriff," Daniel replied. "They are back, the same two men. They are pretending to be cops and trying to threaten me over HOA issues." Sheriff Collins looked at the men, who now stood frozen, unsure of how to react. "Sir," he said firmly to the imposters, "you need to leave immediately. You are not authorized to threaten residents." For a moment, the men hesitated, glancing at each other. Their confidence had vanished. Slowly, they backed away and retreated down the street, leaving Daniel standing at the door, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. Once the immediate danger was gone, Sheriff Collins stepped inside. Daniel explained the full sequence of events from the first knock to the return of the men and their threatening words. The sheriff listened carefully, taking detailed notes and asking questions to ensure he understood the situation. "It seems these men were hired to intimidate you," the sheriff said thoughtfully. "We will investigate the HOA's involvement. You did the right thing by staying calm and contacting us. Intimidation can be dangerous, but you handled it wisely." Daniel nodded, realizing how close he had come to being manipulated. The fake officers had used fear as a tool, but Daniel's calm thinking had prevented them from gaining control. He felt grateful for the presence of real law enforcement and the reassurance that action would be taken. In the following days, Daniel became more vigilant. He checked his property regularly, ensuring that everything was secure. He installed cameras at the front and back of his home, took extra precautions with locks, and maintained close communication with Sheriff Collins. The experience had taught him the value of preparedness and cautiousness. Meanwhile, the HOA continued to send letters demanding compliance with neighborhood rules. Daniel noticed a pattern of subtle intimidation, with vague language and repeated warnings. But he remained firm. He documented every letter, email, and communication, preparing for a formal presentation if necessary. Daniel also spoke with neighbors who had experienced similar intimidation tactics. Some had ignored the threats, while others had quietly complied out of fear. Daniel realized that his response could set an example for the neighborhood. Courage, calmness, and careful documentation could protect residents from harassment. One afternoon, Daniel received another call from Sheriff Collins. "We are reviewing the HOA's actions and the involvement of the imposters," the sheriff explained. "We will ensure that all residents are treated fairly and safely. Keep your records and do not engage anyone who threatens you. We will handle it." Daniel thanked the sheriff and felt a renewed sense of confidence. He knew that the path ahead might involve more challenges, but he was prepared to face them. The fake officers had tested him, but they had also revealed the importance of vigilance, community support, and legal protection. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The quiet of Willow Creek had returned, but he remained alert. The neighborhood felt familiar, yet changed. He had learned that even in peaceful places, caution was necessary. But he also learned that courage, preparation, and calm thinking could overcome fear. As he sipped his tea, Daniel reflected on the events of the past 2 days. The fake officers had tried to intimidate him, but they had underestimated his resolve. Sheriff Collins had shown that real authority could bring safety and justice, and Daniel himself had discovered a strength he had not fully recognized before. The threat had been real, but so was his ability to respond wisely. Daniel knew that the days ahead would require continued vigilance, but he felt empowered. Willow Creek might be a quiet neighborhood, but Daniel now understood that courage, careful planning, and support from the right people could maintain peace. Even in the face of intimidation, the sun disappeared behind the horizon, and Daniel closed the door behind him, locking it securely. He felt a quiet satisfaction. He had faced fear, maintained his composure, and called for help when needed. The fake officers had left, but the lessons they brought would remain with him. The morning after the second confrontation, Daniel woke feeling alert and determined. The events of the past 2 days had left him shaken, but he also felt a strong sense of responsibility. If he allowed fear to dominate his decisions, he might lose control of his own life. He had seen firsthand how easily intimidation could manipulate people, and he refused to become a victim. After breakfast, Daniel decided it was time to take more proactive steps. He began by organizing all the evidence he had collected so far. Photographs of the fake officers, copies of letters from the HOA, and notes on every suspicious interaction were carefully sorted into a folder. Each piece of evidence was labeled with the date, time, and a short description of the incident. Daniel understood that clear documentation would be vital if the situation escalated further, or if legal action became necessary. While he worked, Daniel's phone rang. It was Sheriff Collins. "Good morning, Daniel," the sheriff said. "We are continuing the investigation regarding the men who came to your house. Have you noticed any additional activity or anything unusual around your neighborhood?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing physical today, Sheriff, but I do feel that some HOA members are watching closely. They have sent more letters with vague warnings, and it feels like they are trying to intimidate me." "That is useful information," the sheriff replied. "Keep all letters and documents safe. Do not engage anyone unless it is necessary. Our officers will be patrolling the area over the next few days. If you notice anything suspicious, contact us immediately. We will ensure your safety." Daniel felt reassured by the sheriff's words. He knew that professional oversight was essential, but he also recognized that he needed to be vigilant. He spent the rest of the morning reviewing the HOA rules, trying to understand any possible points of dispute. Everything he had read showed that he was well within his rights. His fence, his garden decorations, and other personal choices were all allowed under the rules. The letters he had received were designed to create fear, not to enforce legitimate regulations. Around midday, Daniel decided to speak with a few neighbors who had lived in Willow Creek for a long time. He wanted to understand if they had experienced similar issues and to gauge whether he was alone in facing this intimidation. He walked down the street and first stopped by Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman known for her involvement in the community. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson," Daniel said politely. "I was wondering if you have noticed anything unusual with the HOA lately, or if you have had strange visitors at your home." Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, Daniel, you're not the only one. A few weeks ago, 2 men came to my house claiming to be officers. They asked questions about my garden decorations and threatened fines if I didn't comply. I thought it was just normal HOA pressure, but now I realize they were pretending to be police." Daniel felt a mix of relief and concern. He was not alone, but it also meant that the intimidation campaign had affected multiple residents. "Did you report it?" he asked. Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "I was scared. I thought the HOA would make things worse if I complained. I didn't want trouble." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. He understood her fear. The fake officers had created an atmosphere of intimidation, making people hesitant to act. But he also knew that action was necessary to protect himself and others. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "It helps to know the full picture. We can work together to ensure our neighborhood is safe." After visiting Mrs. Henderson, Daniel spoke with 2 more neighbors. Each had experienced similar encounters, and each had been too frightened to take immediate action. The pattern was clear. The fake officers were targeting specific residents, creating fear, and hoping to enforce compliance without legitimate authority. Armed with this information, Daniel returned home and began drafting a formal report for Sheriff Collins. He included the dates of the visits, the descriptions of the imposters, the letters from the HOA, and statements from neighbors. He knew that a thorough report would help the sheriff's office investigate efficiently and take action against those responsible. By late afternoon, Sheriff Collins called again. "Daniel, thank you for gathering all of this information," he said. "We are going to coordinate with our team to visit the HOA office and investigate their practices. Your efforts are invaluable, and we will make sure this intimidation ends." Daniel felt a sense of purpose. The past days had been stressful and frightening, but he now understood that careful documentation, calm reasoning, and collaboration with law enforcement could turn fear into action. Later that evening, Daniel noticed another letter slipped under his door. He picked it up cautiously and read it carefully. The language was vague and threatening, warning of penalties and consequences if he did not follow certain rules. But the letter provided no specifics, no reference to official regulations, and no signature that could be verified. Daniel felt a surge of determination. He would not be intimidated. He added the letter to his folder, noting the time and date. Daniel then decided to secure his home further. He installed a small video camera at the front entrance and another at the back door. He adjusted the locks and made sure all windows were secure. The precautions were simple but effective, giving him a sense of control over his environment. As night fell, Daniel heard a soft knock at the door. He tensed, unsure who it could be at this hour. Peering through the peephole, he saw a uniformed officer standing outside. It was Sheriff Collins, accompanied by a deputy. They had come to ensure Daniel's safety and to check on the ongoing situation. "Good evening, Daniel," the sheriff said warmly. "We are here to patrol your area and make sure everything is secure. Have you noticed any unusual activity today?" Daniel shook his head. "Nothing new, Sheriff, but I did receive another threatening letter from the HOA." The sheriff nodded. "We will include that in our investigation. I want you to know that we are taking this matter seriously. No one has the right to intimidate residents using fake authority. We will ensure your safety and address any illegal actions." For the first time since the ordeal began, Daniel felt a real sense of relief. He knew that the presence of law enforcement would deter further attempts at intimidation, at least temporarily. But he also understood that vigilance and documentation would remain important in the days to come. Over the next few days, Daniel worked closely with Sheriff Collins. He provided additional statements, shared photographs of the imposters, and helped identify potential witnesses among his neighbors. The sheriff's office coordinated with other units to monitor the HOA and investigate their actions. Daniel could see progress being made, and it reinforced his belief that calm, careful action could overcome even the most threatening situations. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from the HOA office itself. A woman's voice on the other end introduced herself politely and asked to discuss the complaints regarding his property. Daniel listened carefully but remained cautious. He asked for official documentation, references to specific rules, and a clear explanation of the alleged violations. The conversation was tense but controlled. By the end, Daniel had secured a written record of the interaction, which he immediately added to his growing file of evidence. Daniel also realized that his neighbors were beginning to feel more confident. After hearing about the sheriff's involvement and seeing Daniel's organized documentation, several residents approached him to share their own experiences. Together, they formed a small group to ensure that everyone could support one another if further intimidation occurred. Through these efforts, Daniel began to understand the broader lesson. Fear could only control people if they allowed it. By staying calm, gathering evidence, and seeking legitimate assistance, he was able to protect himself and his community. The imposters had underestimated his resolve, and the HOA's tactics were being challenged through proper channels. As the week progressed, Daniel felt a renewed sense of control. He continued his daily routines but remained vigilant. He reviewed his camera footage, checked the locks, and stayed in contact with Sheriff Collins. The neighborhood, once quiet and peaceful, now had an undercurrent of caution, but it was coupled with a sense of collective strength. Daniel and his neighbors were no longer passive. They were prepared to face any challenges with composure and legal support. One evening, Daniel sat on his porch reflecting on the events of the past week. The imposters had tried to scare him. The letters from the HOA had been intimidating, and the uncertainty had been stressful. Yet through careful action and collaboration, with the sheriff, he had turned fear into a tool for preparation and awareness. He understood now that vigilance, calm reasoning, and proper documentation were essential in protecting one's home and rights. As the sun set over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the lawns and streets, Daniel felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had faced threats, stood his ground, and helped his neighbors find confidence. The imposters had failed, and the real authority of the sheriff had restored safety to his home. Daniel knew that challenges might still arise, but he was no longer fearful. He had discovered inner strength, the importance of preparation, and the value of community support. Willow Creek might be a quiet neighborhood, but Daniel now understood that vigilance and courage were essential to maintaining peace and security. That night, as the lights in his home glowed warmly against the darkness, Daniel felt a calm determination. He would continue to protect his home, support his neighbors, and ensure that no one could use intimidation to control their lives. The threats might continue, but Daniel was ready. He had allies, evidence, and the courage to face whatever came next. And for the first time in days, he felt that Willow Creek could truly return to its peaceful rhythm, thanks to his careful, determined actions. The morning air in Willow Creek was crisp and cool as Daniel prepared for the most important day since the strange events began. Today, he would attend a formal HOA meeting, not as a passive resident, but as someone determined to confront intimidation and protect his rights. His folder of evidence lay neatly on the table: photographs of the fake officers, copies of letters from the HOA, notes about every interaction, and statements from neighbors who had been similarly threatened. Daniel had spent hours organizing each piece, knowing that preparation was key to making his case clear and undeniable. As he dressed, he felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. The events of the past days had been stressful, but they had also taught him a vital lesson. Fear loses power when faced with calm thinking and careful preparation. He made sure to bring his phone fully charged and a pen to take notes. He checked that his recordings and photographs were easily accessible. Today, Daniel would not just defend himself. He would stand up for everyone in the neighborhood who had experienced intimidation. Upon arriving at the HOA meeting, Daniel noticed the familiar faces of residents he had met during his investigations. Some looked nervous, others curious. A few greeted him with quiet smiles as if his courage had inspired them. The HOA board members, on the other hand, appeared tense. The recent investigation by Sheriff Collins had clearly unsettled them. They shuffled papers and whispered among themselves, trying to maintain an air of authority. Daniel took a seat near the front of the room. The president of the HOA, a stern woman named Miss Carter, called the meeting to order. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice measured. "We are here to discuss neighborhood regulations and address resident concerns. Let us proceed." Daniel waited patiently for his turn, listening carefully to the discussion. He noticed the board members were evasive, offering vague answers to questions from other residents. Some residents asked about recent letters and notices they had received. The responses were inconsistent, and Daniel realized the pattern of intimidation extended beyond just his own home. When it was his turn, Daniel stood confidently. "I am Daniel Martin, and I live at 45 Willow Creek Lane," he began. "Over the past week, I've experienced serious intimidation involving individuals claiming to be law enforcement officers. These individuals came to my home and threatened me regarding alleged HOA violations. I have documented everything, and I am presenting this evidence today to ensure transparency and accountability." He laid out his folder on the table, spreading the documents in front of the board. Photographs of the imposters, copies of letters, and notes from neighbors were all visible. The room fell silent. Even residents who had been silent before looked at the evidence with wide eyes. Ms. Carter cleared her throat. "Mr. Martin, are you suggesting that these individuals were connected to the HOA?" Daniel nodded firmly. "I am not making accusations without evidence, but the timing of these visits and the letters I have received shows a clear pattern of intimidation. I have involved the sheriff's office, and they are investigating the matter. I am here to ensure that no one in this neighborhood is subjected to threats or harassment." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some residents murmured quietly, showing support for Daniel. It became clear that many had suspected similar intimidation, but had been too afraid to speak up. Daniel's calm and organized presentation gave them courage. "I would like to go through the events in detail," Daniel continued. "On insert date, 2 men claiming to be law enforcement came to my home. They demanded compliance with HOA rules, threatened consequences, and refused to provide verifiable identification. I immediately contacted Sheriff Collins, who confirmed that these men were not authorized officers and ensured my safety. He went on to explain how the HOA had continued sending vague and threatening letters, creating an atmosphere of fear. Residents should not live in fear of intimidation, Daniel said. Rules should be enforced fairly, with transparency, and without using threats or impersonation of authority. I am asking the board to address these issues openly and to cooperate with law enforcement to ensure safety and fairness. The tension in the room grew. Ms. Carter's face was tight, her voice slightly raised. Mr. Martin, these claims are serious. Do you have proof? Daniel calmly held up his photographs, the letters, and his notes. Yes, every interaction has been documented. I have also gathered statements from other residents who have experienced similar intimidation. One by one, neighbors spoke up. Mrs. Henderson shared her experience with the fake officers, explaining how she had been too afraid to report it initially. Another neighbor described receiving a threatening letter with vague demands. The room filled with a quiet energy, as residents began to see a pattern that had previously been hidden. The board members tried to respond defensively, but the presence of evidence and the calm authority in Daniel's presentation left them with few options. Sheriff Collins, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "I have reviewed the incidents and verified that the individuals who visited Mr. Martin were not authorized law enforcement officers. We are investigating the HOA's involvement, and we will take appropriate action. The safety of residents is our priority." The sheriff's words brought a wave of relief to Daniel and the other residents. The imposter's threats had failed, and real authority had validated their concerns. Daniel felt a surge of confidence. He realized that careful planning, clear communication, and collaboration with law enforcement could turn fear into empowerment. Ms. Carter finally spoke again, her tone more measured. "We will review the complaints and ensure that any issues are addressed according to proper procedure. No resident should feel threatened, and we will cooperate with the sheriff's office fully." Daniel nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The board could no longer hide behind intimidation. The residents had witnessed the evidence, and the sheriff's involvement ensured that any future attempts at harassment would be taken seriously. After the formal meeting, Daniel stayed behind to speak with neighbors individually. Many expressed gratitude for his courage and organization. They had felt powerless before, but seeing Daniel stand up had given them hope. A few even offered to assist in documenting future incidents, creating a small network of residents committed to transparency and safety. Daniel also spoke privately with Sheriff Collins. "I want to ensure that no one else is intimidated like this," he said. "What steps should we take next?" The sheriff explained that the office would continue its investigation, review HOA records, and interview anyone involved in the intimidation. They would also provide guidance to residents on how to document and report suspicious behavior. Daniel listened carefully, appreciating the thoroughness of the plan. As he walked home, Daniel reflected on the events of the day. The confrontation had been challenging, but it had revealed the strength that comes from preparation, calm thinking, and community support. He realized that fear loses power when confronted with courage and clarity. That evening, Daniel reviewed his notes once more. He added details from the meeting, statements from neighbors, and observations about the board's responses. His folder of evidence had grown, and with it, his sense of empowerment. He felt prepared for any future challenges and confident that justice was within reach. The neighborhood seemed quieter now, but Daniel knew that vigilance was still necessary. He continued to check his security cameras, review letters, and communicate with residents. The imposter's attempts to intimidate had failed, but the HOA's role in fostering fear required continued attention. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed subtle changes. The board members were more careful in their communications, letters became clearer and more professional, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood felt calmer. Residents were talking more openly, sharing experiences and supporting each other. Daniel felt a sense of pride. His actions had not only protected his home, but had also empowered the entire community. One afternoon, he received a call from Sheriff Collins. "Daniel, the investigation is progressing. We have identified key individuals involved in the intimidation. Legal actions will follow and residents will be informed. Your efforts have been crucial in exposing these practices." Daniel smiled, feeling a deep sense of relief. The threat was being addressed, and the imposters had no power over him or his neighbors. He realized that courage, careful planning, and collaboration with authority could overcome even the most intimidating situations. That night, as Daniel sat on his porch, the morning sunlight filled Daniel's living room as he prepared for another day in Willow Creek. The week had been long and stressful, filled with tension, uncertainty, and moments of fear. Yet for the first time in days, he felt a sense of cautious optimism. The confrontation at the HOA meeting had revealed the truth, and Sheriff Collins had promised that the investigation would continue. Daniel now knew that he had taken the right steps, staying calm, documenting everything, and involving law enforcement had protected him and his neighbors. He sat at his kitchen table, reviewing his notes and photographs one last time. Every interaction with the imposters, every threatening letter, and every neighbor's statement had been carefully recorded. The sheriff had told him that all this evidence would be crucial in taking formal action against those responsible. Daniel felt proud. The ordeal had tested him, but he had emerged stronger, more vigilant, and more confident in his ability to face challenges. That afternoon, Daniel received a call from Sheriff Collins. "Good afternoon, Daniel. I wanted to update you on our progress. We have identified several individuals involved in the intimidation. Legal actions are being prepared, and we are coordinating with the HOA to ensure accountability. Your efforts in documenting everything have been invaluable." Daniel smiled. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'm glad we could get the truth out. It was a difficult week, but I'm relieved to hear that action is being taken." "You handled this remarkably well," the sheriff continued. "Your calm approach, your attention to detail, and your willingness to involve neighbors have made a real difference. This will not only protect your home but also prevent future incidents." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. The fake officers and the intimidation tactics were no longer in control. The real authorities were acting, and the community was regaining its sense of safety. Over the next few days, Daniel continued to communicate with neighbors. Many of them had been inspired by his courage and organization. Residents who had been hesitant to speak up now shared their experiences openly. They discussed how important it was to document every interaction, to remain calm in the face of intimidation, and to rely on proper legal channels rather than responding impulsively. Daniel realized that the ordeal had brought the neighborhood closer together. People were looking out for one another, sharing information and supporting each other in ways that had not happened before. Fear had been replaced with a sense of community and shared responsibility. One afternoon, Daniel received a formal notice from the sheriff's office. It confirmed that legal proceedings were underway against the imposters who had posed as law enforcement. The notice detailed the charges, which included impersonation, intimidation, and harassment. Daniel felt a sense of justice. The individuals who had tried to frighten him and other residents were being held accountable for their actions. As the news spread, the HOA board began to change its approach. Letters became professional and specific, referencing clear rules and providing proper documentation. Residents noticed a shift in the tone and content of communications. The intimidation tactics that had caused so much fear were being replaced by transparency and adherence to the law. Daniel felt satisfaction knowing that his actions had contributed to this change. One evening, Sheriff Collins visited Daniel at his home. "I wanted to check in and see how you are doing," the sheriff said. "The investigation is nearly complete, and the legal proceedings will ensure that no one in your neighborhood faces this type of intimidation again." Daniel thanked the sheriff. "I appreciate everything you and your team have done. This experience has been challenging, but it also taught me the importance of staying calm, gathering evidence, and working with authorities. I feel more confident now, and I hope the neighborhood will continue to feel safe." The sheriff nodded. "You have set an example for the community, Daniel. Courage, preparation, and cooperation with law enforcement can prevent fear from controlling lives. You did everything right." Daniel spent the next few days reviewing his property and ensuring that everything was secure. He checked his cameras, reinforced locks, and continued to communicate with neighbors. He also made a small folder of instructions for residents, explaining how to document suspicious activity, how to respond calmly to threats, and how to involve authorities if needed. His experience had taught him that preparedness was a powerful tool. As the investigation progressed, the imposters were arrested, and the court proceedings revealed their motives. It turned out that they had been hired to create fear among residents, hoping that intimidation would force compliance with unreasonable demands. Their plan had failed because Daniel and his neighbors had acted wisely, calmly, and decisively. The court hearings were attended by some of the residents, who wanted to show support for Daniel and to ensure that the community's voice was heard. The proceedings were thorough and transparent, and the imposters were held accountable for their actions. Daniel felt relief as justice was served. The threat that had loomed over Willow Creek was finally removed. With the legal actions underway and the neighborhood returning to normal, Daniel felt a renewed sense of peace. The street outside his home was quiet again, the lawns neat and orderly, and the neighbors more connected than ever. The experience had strengthened the sense of community and shared responsibility. Residents were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in ensuring safety and fairness. Daniel also reflected on his own growth. The past week had tested his patience, courage, and problem-solving skills. He had learned that fear can be a powerful tool for those who wish to intimidate, but it can be countered with calmness, preparation, and collaboration with the right authorities. He felt proud of how he had handled the situation and grateful for the support of Sheriff Collins and the neighbors who had spoken up. As the sun set over Willow Creek, Daniel sat on his porch sipping a cup of tea. The neighborhood looked peaceful, bathed in the warm glow of the evening light. Children played quietly in their yards, neighbors waved to each other, and the familiar sounds of a calm street filled the air. Daniel felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. He knew that challenges could still arise, but he was confident that the community was stronger and better prepared. The imposters had failed, the HOA had been held accountable, and the neighborhood had learned the importance of vigilance, documentation, and courage. Daniel felt a quiet pride in knowing that he had played a central role in protecting his home and empowering his neighbors. Over the following weeks, life in Willow Creek returned to its peaceful rhythm. The HOA communicated more transparently. Residents remained vigilant but no longer fearful, and Sheriff Collins continued periodic check-ins to ensure the neighborhood's safety. Daniel maintained his security measures and stayed connected with neighbors, creating a network of awareness and support. One afternoon, as Daniel walked through the neighborhood, he noticed Mrs. Henderson tending to her garden. She smiled warmly and said, "Daniel, you showed us all how to stand up without fear. I feel safer now because of what you did." Daniel smiled back. "We all played a part. It is important to support each other and stay calm when challenges arise. That is how a community stays strong." The experience had taught Daniel that safety is not just about rules or regulations, but about the courage to act wisely, the preparation to protect oneself, and the strength to involve the right authorities when needed. The neighborhood had learned the same lesson. Fear no longer had control. Knowledge, courage, and community did. As the months passed, Daniel's story became known in Willow Creek. Residents often mentioned how his calm thinking and careful documentation had prevented further intimidation. He had set an example for the community, showing that courage and preparation could overcome even the most unexpected threats. One quiet evening, Daniel sat on his porch reflecting on the journey from fear to empowerment. The imposters had been defeated, the HOA had changed its practices, and the neighborhood had grown closer and stronger. The experience had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. Daniel realized that true peace comes not from the absence of challenges, but from the ability to face them with courage, preparation, and support from the right people. As the sky darkened and the stars appeared, Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Willow Creek was peaceful once more. The threats had been removed, justice had been served, and the community had learned to stand together. Daniel knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he was confident that he and his neighbors were ready to face them. He closed the door behind him, locking it securely, and felt a sense of safety and contentment that he had not felt before. The imposters were gone, the HOA was accountable, and the neighborhood was stronger. Daniel had faced fear, stayed calm, documented carefully, involved law enforcement, and empowered his community. And in that quiet moment, Daniel understood a powerful truth. Courage, preparation, and community support could overcome even the most intimidating situations. Peace was not just a gift, it was something earned through wisdom, vigilance, and bravery. Daniel smiled, knowing that Willow Creek would remain a safe, vibrant, and connected neighborhood for years to come, thanks to the actions of residents willing to stand up for what was right.